The rain hammered against the reinforced walls of Marcus Chin's frontier outpost like bullets from a railgun. Each drop carried the acidic sting of Kepler 442b's atmosphere, a constant reminder that this world wanted everything dead that didn't belong here. Marcus sat in his worn leather chair, nursing a cup of synthetic coffee that tasted like motor oil mixed with regret. The bitter liquid was hot, though, and heat was precious on this godforsaken rock. 3 years. 3 years since the Terran Colonial Authority had dumped him on this frontier world with nothing but a prefab shelter, basic supplies, and orders to establish a human presence. Translation: they wanted someone expendable to test whether humans could survive long-term on Kepler 442b before committing real resources. Marcus had been the perfect candidate for expendable, a former Marine whose unit had been wiped out in the Proxima Centauri campaign, left with too many scars and too few options. The outpost itself was a testament to human stubbornness. What had started as a standard colonial authority shelter had grown into something resembling a small fortress. Marcus had salvaged, traded, and occasionally stolen enough materials to expand the original structure into a self-sufficient compound. Solar collectors fed power to recycling systems that turned the toxic atmosphere into breathable air. Hydroponic gardens provided fresh food alongside the standard ration packs. A workshop filled with jury-rigged equipment allowed him to maintain and modify his gear. The perimeter was lined with motion sensors and automated defensive turrets, not standard colonial authority issue. Those had been acquired through less official channels when Marcus realized that Kepler 442b's native life forms didn't appreciate human intrusion. The planet's ecosystem was dominated by silicon-based organisms that treated carbon-based life as either food or a threat to be eliminated. Marcus had learned that lesson the hard way during his first year, when a pack of crystalline predators had nearly turned him into their evening meal. A sharp ping from his security system cut through the steady drumbeat of rain. Marcus set down his coffee and pulled up the sensor display on his wrist-mounted tablet. The screen showed a heat signature approaching the main gate. Small, moving erratically, definitely not one of the local predators. Those moved with purpose and coordination. This looked more like something injured or exhausted. Marcus grabbed his pulse rifle from the weapon rack beside his chair. The rifle was another non-standard addition to his equipment, a military-grade weapon that could punch through the crystalline hide of most native threats. He learned early that the standard colonial authority sidearms were about as effective against local fauna as harsh language. The main airlock cycled him through its decontamination sequence, bathing him in UV light and chemical sprays designed to neutralize the worst of the planet's atmospheric toxins. The outer door opened with a mechanical wheeze, revealing the hostile landscape beyond his walls. Kepler 442b looked like someone had tried to terraform Mars and given up halfway through. The sky was a perpetual orange-brown, thick with particulates that made breathing without filtration impossible. Rocky outcroppings jutted from the ground like broken teeth, and what passed for vegetation consisted of metallic growths that rang like chimes when the wind hit them. It was beautiful in its own alien way, but it was beauty that would kill you if you let your guard down for even a moment. Marcus activated his helmet's night vision and stepped into the storm. The acid rain hissed against his environmental suit's protective coating, leaving small scorch marks that would need repair later. Through the downpour, he could make out movement near the gate, something small and desperate pressed against the barrier like it was seeking shelter. As he got closer, Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. The creature at his gate wasn't one of the planet's native silicon-based life forms. It was carbon-based, like him, but definitely not human. The being stood roughly 3 feet tall on 2 legs with arms that ended in clawed hands. Its body was covered in scales that shifted from deep blue to purple, depending on the angle of the light. But it was the wings that really caught his attention. Tattered membranes stretched between elongated finger bones, clearly designed for flight despite their current damaged state. A dragon. An actual, honest-to-God dragon. Admittedly, it was smaller than the mythological creatures from Earth's folklore, and it looked like it had been through hell, but there was no mistaking what it was. The creature's large, intelligent eyes met his through his helmet's visor, and Marcus saw something there that he recognized all too well: desperation. The dragon's mouth opened, revealing rows of small, sharp teeth. When it spoke, its voice was high-pitched, but unmistakably intelligent, transmitted through the short-range communicator that all sapient species in known space seemed to possess. "Please," the creature said, its words barely audible over the storm. "I need help. I'm so hungry, and I can't fly anymore. Everyone else is dead." Marcus had survived 3 years on this death trap of a planet by being paranoid, suspicious, and quick to shoot anything that moved without proper identification. But looking at this small, injured creature, this child, because that's clearly what it was, he felt something crack in the armor of cynicism he'd built around his heart. The dragon swayed on its feet, exhaustion clear in every line of its small body. Its scales, which should have been vibrant and healthy, were dull and patchy. Marcus could see where some had fallen out entirely, leaving raw patches of skin exposed to the acid rain. One wing hung at an awkward angle, clearly broken. The creature was starving, injured, and completely alone on a world that wanted it dead. "Please," the dragon repeated, its voice growing weaker. "I won't hurt you. I just need somewhere safe to rest." Every survival instinct Marcus had developed screamed at him to walk away. Unknown alien species were dangerous by definition. The creature could be carrying diseases, could be more dangerous than it appeared, could be part of some elaborate trap. Hell, for all he knew, it could be a shapeshifter mimicking something harmless to get past his defenses. But those were the thoughts of a soldier, and Marcus Chun had been more than just a soldier once upon a time. Before the war, before the trauma, before they'd shipped him off to die slowly on a frontier world, he'd been someone who believed in doing the right thing even when it wasn't smart. The dragon's legs gave out, and it collapsed against the gate, too weak to stand. Rain continued to pound down on its unprotected form, and Marcus could see steam rising where the acidic water hit exposed skin. If he left it out here, the creature would be dead within hours. Marcus Chun looked at the small, desperate being seeking shelter at his gate, and made a decision that would change everything. He walked over to the control panel and began the sequence to open the outer barrier. "Come inside," he said simply. The dragon's eyes widened with surprise and relief. As the gate slowly cycled open, creating a temporary airlock between the outer and inner barriers, Marcus realized he'd just invited a completely unknown alien species into his home. The rational part of his mind cataloged all the ways this could go wrong: disease, violence, attracting unwanted attention from whatever had killed the rest of this creature's people. But as he watched the small dragon struggle to its feet and stumble gratefully toward shelter, Marcus found he didn't care about the risks. Some things were worth the danger, and helping someone who needed it was one of them. It was a very human thing to do, even if it might get him killed. The dragon made it through the outer airlock before collapsing again, its strength completely exhausted. Marcus quickly sealed the outer door and initiated the decontamination cycle. The UV lights and chemical sprays that cleaned the atmospheric toxins from his suit would also help sterilize any potential contaminants the dragon might be carrying. Through the transparent aluminum viewing port, Marcus watched the small creature huddle in the center of the airlock, shivering despite the heated air. Up close, he could see that its injuries were even worse than he'd first thought. The broken wing was clearly causing significant pain, and there were what looked like burn marks along its flanks. Something had hurt this child badly before it had ended up at his door. The decontamination cycle completed with a soft chime, and the inner door began to open. The dragon looked up at him with those large, intelligent eyes, and Marcus saw a mixture of gratitude and wariness there. Smart kid, it knew enough to be careful even when accepting help. "It's okay," Marcus said, setting his rifle aside and raising his hands to show he wasn't a threat. You're safe now. The dragon tried to stand, but immediately collapsed again. Whatever reserves of strength had gotten it to the outpost were completely depleted. Marcus knelt down beside the creature, noting how small and fragile it looked without the barrier of the gate between them. "Easy there," he said softly, the same tone he'd once used to calm injured soldiers on the battlefield. "Let's get you somewhere warm and dry." Without waiting for permission, Marcus carefully scooped the dragon up in his arms. The creature was surprisingly light, its bones hollow like a bird's to enable flight. It tensed for a moment at the contact, then relaxed with a soft sigh of relief. Marcus could feel the rapid beating of its heart against his chest, a reminder of just how young and frightened this being was. He carried the dragon through the inner corridors of his outpost, past the workshop and storage areas, to what served as his living quarters. The main room was spartanly furnished, but comfortable, a place to relax after long days of maintenance and patrol. More importantly, it was warm and dry and safe. Marcus gently set the dragon down on his couch, the old military surplus furniture creaking under the additional weight. The creature immediately curled up into a tight ball, instinctively making itself as small as possible. It was a defensive posture Marcus recognized from his own experiences, the way someone acted when they'd been hurt too many times and expected more pain to follow. "Stay there," Marcus said quietly. "I'm going to get some supplies." The dragon nodded weakly, not moving from its protective curl. Marcus headed to his medical kit, his mind racing through everything he knew about xenobiology. The truth was, he didn't know much. His medical training had focused on human anatomy, with only the most basic overview of the alien species humanity had encountered. But the fundamentals of trauma care were universal. Stop the bleeding, treat for shock, keep the patient stable. He returned with medical supplies, a heating pad, and some emergency rations. The dragon watched him approach with wary eyes, still ready to bolt despite its exhaustion. Marcus moved slowly and deliberately, making sure not to do anything that might be interpreted as threatening. "I'm going to take a look at that wing," Marcus explained. "It's going to hurt, but I need to see how bad it is." The dragon hesitated for a moment, then slowly extended its injured wing. Marcus sucked in a breath when he saw the damage. The wing membrane was torn in several places, and one of the supporting bone struts was clearly broken. It was the kind of injury that would ground the creature permanently without proper medical care. "What happened to you?" Marcus asked as he gently cleaned the wounds with antiseptic. The dragon was quiet for so long that Marcus thought it might not answer. When it finally spoke, its voice was barely above a whisper. "Hunters," it said. "They came to our nesting grounds 3 days ago. Ships from the sky, with weapons that burned everything they touched. My clutch mates, and I hid in the deep caves, but they found us anyway." Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest. He'd seen enough war to recognize a massacre when he heard about one. "How many of you were there?" 47, the dragon replied, its voice breaking slightly. "I'm the only one who got away, and only because I fell into an old mining shaft when they shot me down. By the time I climbed out, they were gone. Everything was burned. The antiseptic had cleaned most of the debris from the wing wounds, but the broken bone would need to be set properly." Marcus reached for a small medical scanner, one of the few pieces of advanced tech he'd managed to acquire during his time on the frontier. "I'm going to scan your wing," he explained. "This won't hurt, but it might feel strange." The scanner hummed softly as it mapped the dragon's bone structure. The display showed what Marcus had suspected, a clean break that could be repaired with time and proper care. The dragon's physiology was remarkably similar to Earth birds, with some interesting variations that suggested an evolutionary path optimized for both flight and intelligence. "Good news," Marcus said, setting aside the scanner. "The bone can be fixed. It'll take time to heal, but you should be able to fly again eventually." Hope flickered in the dragon's eyes for the first time since Marcus had brought it inside. "Really? You can fix it?" "I can try," Marcus replied honestly. "I'm not a doctor, but I've had some field medic training. First, though, we need to get some food in you. When was the last time you ate?" The dragon's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, answering the question without words. Marcus chuckled softly and reached for one of his emergency ration packs. These aren't exactly gourmet, he warned as he heated up the meal, but they'll keep you alive. The smell of warm food seemed to revive the dragon somewhat. It struggled to sit up, accepting the offered meal with obvious gratitude. Marcus watched as the creature ate with desperate hunger, making small sounds of appreciation between bites. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, settling into a nearby chair. The dragon paused in its eating to look up at him. "ZYX," it said simply. "I am ZYX of the Crimson Valley Clutch. What are you called, kind stranger?" "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Chun, Terran Colonial Authority, though not sure they'd still claim me." ZYX tilted its head curiously, a gesture that reminded Marcus of Earth's ravens. "You are human, yes? I have heard of your people, though I have never met one before. They say humans are fierce warriors who never give up, no matter how bad things become." Marcus snorted softly. "Yeah, well, we're also supposedly smart enough not to invite strange aliens into our homes. Guess I missed that lesson." To his surprise, ZYX made a sound that could only be described as a laugh, a musical trill that was genuinely pleasant to hear. "I am grateful for your poor education, Marcus Chun. Without it, I would be dead in the acid rain. Tell me about these hunters," Marcus said, his expression growing serious. "What do their ships look like? Did they say anything, make any demands?" ZYX's good mood evaporated instantly, fear creeping back into its voice. "Black ships like flying shadows. They spoke in a language I did not know, but their meaning was clear. They wanted us dead or captured. I could not tell which. Some of my clutch mates they took alive, dragged them up into their ships before they left." Marcus felt his blood run cold. Slavers. The galaxy was full of species that made their living capturing and selling other sapient beings, and dragons, especially young ones, would be extremely valuable on the black market. Their intelligence, their ability to fly, their natural beauty, all made them perfect exotic pets for the wealthy and depraved. "Did you see which direction they went when they left?" Marcus asked. ZYX nodded, its small claws scraping nervously against the couch fabric. "Toward the setting sun, toward the great crater that marks the boundary of our territory." Marcus knew the crater ZYX meant. It was about 100 kilometers west of his position, a massive impact site that served as a natural landmark. If the slavers had a base of operations, that would be a logical place to set up, far from any major settlements, with good sight lines for defensive purposes. "How many ships?" "3 that I saw," ZYX replied. "But there may have been more. I was hiding, trying not to be seen." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the information. 3 ships suggested a significant operation, not just opportunistic raiders. These people were organized, well-equipped, and ruthless enough to slaughter children for profit. The kind of enemies Marcus had been trained to fight. "Get some rest," he told ZYX gently. "You're safe here. I have security systems that will keep unwanted visitors out." ZYX looked uncertain. "You will not turn me away when I am healed? Send me back into the wilderness?" The question hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. This small creature had lost everything: family, home, safety, and was now dependent on the kindness of a stranger for survival. It would be easy to let ZYX recover and then send it on its way. Clean, simple, no long-term complications. But looking at those large, intelligent eyes, Marcus knew he couldn't do that. This wasn't just about providing emergency aid to an injured animal. This was about taking responsibility for another thinking, feeling being who had no one else in the universe to rely on. "This is your home now," Marcus said quietly. "For as long as you want it to be." ZYX stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this human was telling the truth. Then, tears began to flow down its scaled cheeks. Apparently dragons cried much the same way humans did. "Thank you," ZYX whispered. "Thank you, Marcus Chun." As Marcus watched the exhausted young dragon settle down to sleep on his couch, He realized his quiet life as a hermit on the frontier had just become infinitely more complicated. He'd gone from being a forgotten exile to being the guardian of what might be the last surviving member of an entire species. The smart thing would be to contact the colonial authority, report the slaver activity, and let someone else handle the situation. But Marcus had stopped trusting authority figures to do the right thing long before they'd shipped him off to this backwater world. If those slavers were going to be stopped, if ZYX's captured clutchmates were going to be rescued, it would have to be done by someone who actually gave a damn about justice. Marcus Chun looked at the sleeping dragon on his couch and began planning for war. Marcus woke before dawn, a habit left over from his military days. The outpost was quiet except for the steady hum of life support systems and the distant patter of rain against the walls. He'd given ZYX's bed while he took the couch, but even from across the room he could hear the young dragon's troubled breathing. Nightmares, probably. Marcus knew all about those. He moved quietly through his morning routine, checking security feeds and system diagnostics while brewing another pot of synthetic coffee. Everything showed green. No overnight intrusions, no system failures, no immediate threats to worry about. Just another peaceful morning on a planet that was trying to kill them both. ZYX stirred as the smell of coffee reached the sleeping area. The dragon's large eyes opened slowly, taking a moment to focus before remembering where it was. Relief crossed its features as the previous night's rescue came back to memory. "Good morning," Marcus said softly. "How are you feeling?" ZYX sat up carefully, testing its injured wing. The basic first aid Marcus had provided seemed to have helped. The swelling was down, and the dragon was moving with less obvious pain. "Better," ZYX admitted. "The pain is not so sharp now, but I am still very hungry." Marcus smiled and reached for another ration pack. Growing kids always are. "Here, try this one. It's supposed to be beef stew, though I wouldn't swear to it." As ZYX ate, Marcus studied his unexpected house guest more carefully in the morning light. The dragon's scales showed the blue-purple coloration of health where they weren't damaged, and its eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably sapient. But there were details Marcus hadn't noticed in the storm. Small scars on the creature's hands and arms that suggested ZYX had been learning to use tools before the attack. "Tell me about your people," Marcus said, settling down with his coffee. "What was life like before the hunters came?" ZYX paused in its eating, a distant look crossing its features. "We lived in the mountains, in caves we carved ourselves over many generations. My clutch mother was a metal worker. She taught us to shape the mountain's copper into tools and art. My clutch father was a scout, one of the best flyers in the valley. He could navigate by the stars alone, even in the worst storms." The dragon's voice grew sad as it continued. "We were learning too. I was going to be a historian, keeping the stories and knowledge of our people. My clutch brother Vex wanted to be an explorer, to map the lands beyond our territory. My clutch sister Nira was studying the healing arts, learning to mend bones and cure sickness." "Were?" Marcus asked gently. "Vex was killed in the first attack," ZYX said quietly. "I saw him fall from the sky when their weapons hit him. Nira was taken alive. She fought the whole time. They dragged her to their ship." Marcus felt the familiar burn of anger in his chest. He'd seen too many good people killed or captured by those who thought strength gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. The faces changed, but the story was always the same. Predators preying on those who couldn't defend themselves. "How many of your people were taken alive?" he asked. ZYX thought for a moment. "Perhaps 15? It was chaos, hard to keep count. But they seemed more interested in the young ones, those who had not yet reached full size." That confirmed Marcus's suspicions about the slavers' motives. Young dragons would be easier to transport, easier to control, and would bring higher prices on the black market. The fact that they'd taken live prisoners meant there was still a chance for rescue, if Marcus could find their base and figure out how to get inside. "I want to show you something," Marcus said, standing and walking to his computer terminal. A few keystrokes brought up a topographical map of the local region, showing the crater ZYX had mentioned and the surrounding terrain. Can you mark where the attack happened? Marcus asked. ZYX hopped down from the couch and approached the screen, studying the map with obvious intelligence. After a moment, it pointed to a cluster of mountain peaks about 60 kilometers to the northwest. There, it said, the Crimson Valley is between those 3 peaks. Our caves were carved into the eastern face. Marcus marked the location and began calculating distances and travel times. 60 kilometers through hostile terrain wasn't impossible, but it would be dangerous even in his armored vehicle. More importantly, he needed to know what he'd be walking into. I'm going to take a scouting run, he announced. See if I can get eyes on this crater, maybe spot their base. ZYX looked alarmed. You would risk yourself for people you do not know? Marcus paused in his preparations, thinking about how to explain human nature to an alien mind. My people have a saying, evil wins when good people do nothing. Your clutch mates are in trouble, and I'm the only one in position to help them. That makes it my responsibility. But why? ZYX pressed. I'm not of your tribe, not of your species. What do you gain by helping us? It was a fair question, and one Marcus had been asking himself since bringing ZYX inside. The smart answer would be to talk about building alliances, establishing trade relationships, or securing humanity's position in the galactic community. But the truth was simpler and more human than that. Because it's the right thing to do, Marcus said simply. Because if I don't help, who will? ZYX stared at him for a long moment, something like wonder in its large eyes. Your species is very strange, Marcus Chun. But I think I begin to understand why you have survived when so many others have not. Marcus finished checking his gear and sealed his environmental suit. The armored vehicle in his garage was another unauthorized modification, a civilian transport he'd upgraded with military-grade armor plating and defensive systems. It wasn't pretty, but it could handle the local terrain and most of the predators they were likely to encounter. Stay inside, he instructed ZYX. Don't open the doors for anyone but me. If something happens and I don't come back, there's a communicator in the emergency kit that will reach the Colonial Authority. Tell them what happened here. ZYX nodded solemnly. How long will you be gone? Few hours, hopefully. Just long enough to get a look at what we're dealing with. The garage door opened with a mechanical rumble, revealing the hostile landscape beyond the outpost's walls. Marcus guided his vehicle through the airlock system and out into the acid rain, following a route he'd mapped during his 3 years of isolation. The journey to the crater took him through some of the most dangerous terrain on Kepler 442b. Crystalline formations jutted from the ground like alien forests, their surfaces reflecting and refracting light in ways that played havoc with electronic sensors. More than once, Marcus had to stop and manually verify his position using old-fashioned compass readings. Wildlife was sparse but deadly. Silicon-based predators moved through the crystal formations like living geological features, their bodies perfectly adapted to blend with the environment. Marcus spotted several during his journey, but none showed interest in his vehicle. Apparently, the armor plating made him look more like a rock than a potential meal. After 2 hours of careful driving, Marcus reached the rim of the crater ZYX had indicated. The impact site was massive, easily 10 kilometers across and several hundred meters deep. Ancient volcanic activity had created a network of caves and tunnels throughout the crater walls, providing perfect hiding spots for anyone who wanted to avoid detection. Marcus parked his vehicle behind a cluster of crystal formations and deployed his reconnaissance equipment. Military-grade binoculars and motion sensors would give him a clear picture of any activity in the crater without exposing his position. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. 3 black ships sat on the crater floor, exactly as ZYX had described. They were sleek, predatory-looking craft that screamed military or paramilitary origin. Not the kind of ships civilians could afford, which meant these slavers had serious backing. Movement around the ships caught his attention. Humanoid figures in environmental suits were moving equipment between the vessels and a cave entrance carved into the crater's eastern wall. Marcus counted at least 20 individuals, all armed with what looked like military-grade weapons. But it was what he saw near the cave entrance that made his blood run cold. Cages. Dozens of them, some empty and some containing small, colorful shapes that could only be dragons. Even from this distance, Marcus could see the prisoners moving restlessly in their confinement. "Bastards," he muttered, adjusting his binoculars for a closer look. The operation was more extensive than he'd initially thought. This wasn't just a raiding party. It was a full-scale harvesting operation. The slavers had set up a temporary processing facility, complete with holding areas, medical equipment, and what looked like a communications array powerful enough to coordinate with off-world buyers. Marcus spent the next hour documenting everything he could see: guard rotations, equipment placement, possible entry points, escape routes. All the intelligence he'd need to plan an assault. Because that's what this was going to be, despite the overwhelming odds. There was no way the Colonial Authority would respond fast enough to save the captured dragons, even if Marcus could convince them to care about the fate of an unknown alien species. The return journey was faster, but no less dangerous. Marcus pushed his vehicle harder, anxiety gnawing at him as he thought about what he'd seen. 20 armed slavers with military equipment against one aging ex-Marine with a pulse rifle and too much conscience. The smart play would be to cut his losses, maybe try to relocate ZYX somewhere safer. But Marcus Chin hadn't survived Proxima Centauri by making the smart play. He'd survived by doing whatever it took to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves, even when the odds were impossible. He found ZYX waiting anxiously by the window when he returned to the outpost. The young dragon rushed to meet him as he came through the airlock, relief evident in every line of its small body. "You're back. I was afraid something had happened to you." Marcus set aside his gear and pulled up the reconnaissance photos on his main computer. ZYX studied the images with growing excitement and horror. Excitement at seeing proof that its clutchmates were alive, horror at seeing them caged like animals. "They're really there," the YX whispered. "Nira, and Kex, and little Pip. They're alive. For now," Marcus said grimly. "But not for long. This looks like a temporary operation. They'll move the prisoners off-world as soon as they can arrange transport." ZYX turned to him with desperate eyes. "Can we save them?" Marcus looked at the tactical situation displayed on his screen. 20 armed guards, defensive positions, military equipment, and prisoners to protect during any assault. By any rational assessment, it was a suicide mission. "We can try," he said. Over the next several hours, Marcus began planning the impossible. His military training kicked in, analyzing every angle and option available. The slavers had numbers and equipment, but they also had weaknesses. They were overconfident, settled into a routine, treating this as just another profitable job rather than a war. "Tell me about dragon abilities," Marcus said as he sketched out preliminary assault plans. "What can your people do that these slavers might not expect?" ZYX thought carefully. "We are stronger than we look, and faster in the air than most expect. Our claws can cut through metal if we try hard enough. And we can see heat patterns even in darkness." "Thermal vision?" Marcus asked with interest. "That could be useful." "Yes, though I do not know your word for it. We see the warm places and the cool places even when there is no light." Marcus made notes, adjusting his plans to account for dragon capabilities. If he could get the prisoners free of their cages, they might be able to contribute to their own rescue. It was still a long shot, but at least it was something approaching a real plan. "There's something else," ZYX said hesitantly. "Something that might help, but also might anger you." Marcus looked up from his planning. "What?" When the hunters attacked, they spoke to each other in their strange language. But some of their words, they sounded like human words. Like they were using your people's speech mixed with their own. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of words?" "Command words. Move, secure, package. Things like that." And one of them, the leader, he had markings on his clothing that looked like symbols I've seen before. "Where?" ZYX was quiet for a moment, clearly reluctant to continue. "On the supply shipments that sometimes come to our valley. Boxes marked with human writing and symbols." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Human involvement in the slave trade wasn't unheard of, but it always left a bitter taste in his mouth. His own species selling other sapient beings for profit. It was the kind of thing that made him ashamed to be human. "Did you recognize any of the symbols?" he asked. ZYX nodded reluctantly. "The winged star. The same mark that was on the human supply boxes." Marcus's blood turned to ice. The winged star was the symbol of Stellar Logistics, one of the largest shipping companies in human space. They had government contracts, military connections, and enough political influence to operate with minimal oversight. "Son of a bitch," Marcus muttered. This wasn't just a slaver operation. It was a corporate harvesting mission, probably sanctioned at the highest levels, which meant the colonial authority wouldn't be coming to help, even if Marcus could contact them. They might even be in on it. He looked at ZYX, who was watching him with worried eyes. The young dragon had just revealed that some humans were complicit in the destruction of its people, and was clearly afraid of how Marcus would react to that news. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. "I'm sorry that my people did this to yours." ZYX tilted its head in confusion. "You're not responsible for the actions of others of your species, any more than I am responsible for the actions of all dragons. Why do you apologize?" It was such a simple, logical response that it caught Marcus off guard. Here was this young alien, showing more wisdom about individual responsibility than most adults of any species managed. "Because someone should," Marcus replied. "Because what happened to your people was wrong, and someone from my species should acknowledge that." ZYX studied him for a long moment, then made that musical trilling sound that served as dragon laughter. "You really are a strange species, Marcus-chan. But I think that strangeness might be your greatest strength." Marcus turned back to his assault plans, but his mind was racing with new implications. If Stellar Logistics was involved, this operation had resources and backing he hadn't initially calculated. The 3 ships in the crater were probably just the tip of the iceberg. There would be transport vessels standing by to move the captured dragons, processing facilities to prepare them for sale, and buyers already lined up. But there was also an opportunity in this revelation. Corporate operations followed predictable patterns, relied on schedules, and procedures. They weren't as adaptable as military units, weren't as paranoid as real criminals. If Marcus could disrupt their timeline, force them to deviate from their planned procedures, he might be able to create the chaos he needed to mount a rescue. "Change of plans," Marcus announced. "We're not just rescuing your clutch mates. We're shutting this whole operation down." ZYX looked at him with a mixture of hope and concern. "Ow!" Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. By reminding them that humans can be just as dangerous as they think they are. He pulled up a new set of schematics on his computer, showing the layout of his outpost workshop. If they were going to take on a corporate paramilitary operation, they'd need better equipment than a single pulse rifle and good intentions. "Time to build some surprises," Marcus said, "and maybe teach you how humans really fight when they're angry." The workshop hummed with activity as Marcus and ZYX spent the next 2 days preparing for what any sane person would call a suicide mission. The small dragon had proven surprisingly adept at technical work, its clawed hands perfect for detail work that would have been difficult for Marcus's bulkier fingers. "Pass me the micro-fusion cell," Marcus said, not looking up from the device he was assembling. ZYX carefully handed over the power source, watching with fascination as Marcus integrated it into what looked like a simple communication device. "What does this one do again?" "Electronic warfare package," Marcus explained, sealing the device's housing. "It'll jam their communications, mess with their sensors, and generally make their lives difficult. Corporate operations fall apart fast when they can't coordinate." The workbench was covered with similar devices, each one designed to level the playing field against a numerically superior enemy. Smoke grenades filled with particulates that would disrupt thermal imaging. Proximity mines cobbled together from mining charges and motion sensors. Drone jammers built from spare parts and military-grade software that Marcus definitely shouldn't have had access to. But The centerpiece of their arsenal was something that would have made Marcus's old drill sergeant proud. A collection of improvised explosives that could turn the slavers' temporary base into a very permanent crater. You know, ZYX said thoughtfully, when my people told stories about humans, they always said you were either the most generous allies or the most terrifying enemies in the galaxy. I thought they were exaggerating. Marcus chuckled as he calibrated a targeting device. Probably not. We tend to be fairly extreme about most things. Comes from evolving on a death world, I think. Everything's a threat, so you either run from it or destroy it completely. And you have chosen not to run. Running's not really an option. Even if we could get off planet, these people would just find more dragons to enslave. Better to end it here. ZYX was quiet for a moment, watching Marcus work with obvious admiration. Why do you care so much? About my people, I mean. You could have given me food and shelter and sent me away when I healed. Instead, you risk your life for dragons you have never met. It wasn't the first time the young dragon had asked that question, and Marcus was beginning to understand that it was important to ZYX to understand human motivations. Dragons, it seemed, were more pragmatic than humans when it came to risk assessment. Tell me about your clutch mother, Marcus said instead of answering directly. ZYX's expression softened with memory. She was wise and strong. She taught us to work metal, but also to think before we acted. She always said that the metal must be heated to be shaped, but too much heat destroys it. Did she ever turn away someone who needed help? Never, ZYX replied immediately. Any dragon who came to our valley seeking aid was given food and shelter, even if we barely had enough for ourselves. She said it was the way of our people. Same principle, Marcus said simply. Some things are more important than being safe. As they worked, Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying ZYX's company. The young dragon was curious about everything, quick to learn, and possessed of a dry sense of humor that reminded Marcus of some of his old squad mates. It was easy to forget that he was talking to an alien. ZYX's personality was so distinctly individual that the physical differences stopped matching. There, Marcus said, sealing the last device. That should be enough to make things interesting. ZYX examined their handiwork with obvious appreciation. How do we get all of this to the crater without being detected? Marcus activated his computer and pulled up the reconnaissance data again. Carefully. The good news is that corporate security follows predictable patterns. They'll have sensor nets and patrols, but they'll be focused on obvious approach routes. We go in quiet, set up our surprises, then make enough noise to confuse them while we free the prisoners. And if something goes wrong? Marcus met the young dragon's eyes seriously. If something goes wrong, we improvise. But, ZYX, I need you to promise me something. If this turns into a complete disaster, if it looks like we're not going to make it out, you run. You don't try to save me. You don't stick around to fight. You find a way off this planet, and you make sure someone knows what happened here. ZYX bristled at the suggestion. I will not abandon you, Marcus Chun. You took me in when I had nothing, fed me, protected me. Honor demands that I stand with you. Honor's going to get you killed, Marcus said bluntly. And if you die, who's going to remember your people? Who's going to tell their stories? The dragon's eyes went wide as the implication hit home. As possibly the only survivor of its species, ZYX carried the entire cultural heritage of the dragons. Its death would mean the complete extinction of thousands of years of history, art, and knowledge. That is a heavy responsibility, ZYX said quietly. The heaviest, Marcus agreed, which is why you need to survive this, even if I don't. They spent the rest of the day planning their approach route and timing. The slavers maintained a regular patrol schedule, rotating guards every 6 hours with predictable gaps in coverage. Marcus had identified a window of opportunity just before dawn, when night shift guards would be tired and day shift personnel wouldn't be fully alert yet. The plan was ambitious but simple. Infiltrate the perimeter, plant explosive charges on the ships, and main facility, release the prisoners, and fight their way out in the chaos that followed. It wasn't elegant, but it played to human strengths, adaptability, aggression, and an absolute refusal to quit when protecting something important. "We move out in 4 hours," Marcus announced as they finished their preparations. "Try to get some sleep." But sleep proved elusive for both of them. Marcus spent the time checking and rechecking his gear, running through contingency plans and backup options. Beside him, ZYX sat quietly, occasionally making soft humming sounds that Marcus realized were dragon prayers or meditations. "Are you afraid?" Marcus asked. ZYX considered the question seriously. "Yes, but also excited. Is that strange? Tomorrow I might see my clutchmates again, might hold them, and know they are safe. That joy outweighs the fear." Marcus smiled. "Not strange at all. Fear keeps you alive, but hope keeps you fighting." As the time approached for their departure, Marcus made one final check of their equipment. The improvised weapons were loaded into a stealth transport case that would hide their signatures from most sensors. His armor was sealed and tested, all systems green. ZYX wore a modified environmental suit that would protect its healing wing while allowing for maximum mobility. "Ready?" Marcus asked. ZYX nodded, its large eyes bright with determination. "Let's go save my family." The journey to the crater was tense, but uneventful. Marcus's vehicle was designed for stealth operations, its engine muffled and its hull coated with sensor-absorbing materials. They covered the distance in just over an hour, stopping 2 kilometers from the crater rim to avoid detection. From there, they proceeded on foot, carrying their equipment through the treacherous crystal formations that surrounded the impact site. The acid rain had stopped, but the ground was still slick with corrosive moisture that hissed against their protective gear. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing to a cluster of sensor arrays positioned along the crater rim. First obstacle. The corporate security grid was professionally installed, but followed standard patterns. Marcus had dealt with similar systems during his military career, and he knew their weaknesses. A few carefully placed jamming devices would create blind spots large enough for 2 people to slip through. They worked in silence, ZYX proving to be an excellent assistant despite its lack of military training. The young dragon's natural stealth and keen eyesight made it perfect for spotting patrol routes and guard positions. Within an hour, they had successfully penetrated the perimeter and reached the crater's inner wall. From their new vantage point, they had a clear view of the slaver operation spread out below them. 3 ships sat in the center of the crater floor, just as Marcus had observed before. But now he could see additional details that his reconnaissance had missed. Loading equipment was being moved between the vessels and the cave complex, suggesting they were preparing to move the prisoners soon. Time was running out. "Can you see the cages from here?" Marcus asked. ZYX pointed to a cluster of structures near the main cave entrance. "There. I can see movement inside them. My people are there." Marcus studied the layout through his binoculars, identifying guard positions and patrol routes. The slavers were confident, perhaps overconfident. Their security was focused on preventing escape rather than defending against assault, which would work in Marcus's favor. Phase 1, Marcus said, beginning to deploy their explosive charges. "We take out their transportation and communications." The charges were small, but powerful, designed to cripple rather than completely destroy the ships. Marcus wanted the slavers stranded and confused, not vaporized. Dead enemies couldn't be interrogated, and he still needed to know who was backing this operation. ZYX proved remarkably adept at stealth work, its natural dragon abilities allowing it to move through the complex without triggering sensors or attracting attention. Within 30 minutes, they had placed charges on all 3 ships and the main communications array. Phase 2, Marcus said, checking his timer. "Free the prisoners." This was the dangerous part. Getting close to the cages meant exposing themselves to guard patrols and security cameras. But Marcus had spotted a weakness in their setup. The slavers were using portable containment units that relied on electronic locks. A few pulses from his military-grade hacking device would open every cage simultaneously. They moved carefully through the shadows, avoiding the regularly spaced guard posts. The slavers were human, Marcus noted with disgust, along with a few other species he recognized as known criminal organizations. Stellar Logistics had hired the worst of the worst for this job. The dragon cages were heartbreaking to see up close. Each one contained a young dragon, some barely larger than ZYX, all showing signs of rough treatment. They huddled in the corners of their prisons, fear evident in their large eyes. "Nira," ZYX whispered, spotting its clutched sister in one of the central cages. The imprisoned dragon looked up at the sound, hope flaring in her expression as she recognized ZYX. She started to call out, but ZYX quickly gestured for silence, pointing to the nearby guards. Marcus positioned his hacking device against the main control panel for the containment system. Military-grade encryption was no match for equipment designed to break through enemy communications, and within minutes, he had full access to the system. "Why give a signal?" he whispered to ZYX. "Tell them all to run for the cave entrance. We'll hold the guards off while they escape." ZYX nodded, positioning itself where all the caged dragons could see. Marcus checked his timer. The explosive charges would detonate in exactly 10 minutes, whether they were clear or not. "Now," Marcus said, triggering the hacking device. Every cage lock disengaged simultaneously with soft clicks. For a moment, the imprisoned dragons stared in shock, unable to believe their luck. Then, ZYX began speaking rapidly in the dragon language, its voice urgent but controlled. The response was immediate. Dragons poured from their prisons like a colorful flood, some stopping to help injured clutchmates, others heading straight for the cave entrance as directed. But their movement triggered motion sensors, and alarms began wailing throughout the complex. "Contact!" Marcus shouted, raising his pulse rifle as guards came running from all directions. The battle erupted with sudden violence. Marcus's rifle spat coherent energy pulses that dropped the first wave of guards, but more kept coming. The slavers were professionals, moving in coordinated teams and laying down covering fire as they advanced. "ZYX, get them out of here," Marcus called, falling back toward a cluster of equipment crates that would provide cover. But the young dragon had other ideas. Instead of fleeing with its rescued clutchmates, ZYX spread its injured wing and let out a sound that Marcus had never heard before, a dragon war cry that echoed off the crater walls like thunder. The effect on the other dragons was electric. Instead of running in panic, they formed into a fighting formation with ZYX at the center, their claws extended and their eyes blazing with righteous fury. These weren't just prey animals fleeing their captors. They were intelligent beings who had been enslaved, and they wanted revenge. "Well," Marcus muttered, adjusting his tactics to account for unexpected allies, "this is going to be interesting." The first guard to reach the dragon formation learned the hard way that young didn't mean helpless. ZYX's claws raked across the human's armor, shredding the protective material like paper. The slaver went down screaming, his weapon spinning away across the crater floor. Marcus grinned fiercely and opened fire with renewed enthusiasm. This was what humans did best: impossible odds, desperate circumstances, and allies who refused to give up. It was almost like being back with his old unit, except this time he was fighting alongside dragons instead of marines. The countdown timer in his head reached 0 just as a second wave of guards emerged from the cave complex. Marcus had just enough time to shout a warning before the first explosive charges detonated. The ships erupted in sequential explosions that lit up the crater like miniature suns. Shockwaves rolled across the floor, knocking guards and dragons alike to their knees. But Marcus had planned for this. The charges were positioned to disable rather than destroy, creating maximum confusion with minimum friendly fire casualties. In the chaos that followed, with alarms screaming and guards struggling to re-establish communication with their destroyed command center, Marcus and his dragon allies pressed their attack. It was time to teach these slavers what happened when they underestimated human determination and dragon fury. The aftermath of the explosions created exactly the chaos Marcus had hoped for. Smoke and debris filled the crater, Emergency lights cast wild shadows across the complex, and the slavers' carefully organized operation descended into panicked confusion. But Marcus knew the advantage wouldn't last long. These were professionals, and they'd recover quickly once they regrouped. "Move, move, move," Marcus shouted, leading the charge toward the cave entrance where the slavers' main base was located. The rescue dragons followed his lead with a coordination that surprised him. Despite their youth, they moved like a trained unit, covering each other's flanks and working together to overwhelm isolated guards. ZYX flew alongside them as best it could with its injured wing, calling out tactical information in the dragon language. A slaver in corporate security armor emerged from behind a supply crate, raising an energy rifle toward the advancing dragons. Marcus put 3 pulse shots center mass before the man could fire, watching him crumple behind his makeshift cover. "Nira, left flank," ZYX called out in accented standard. The dragon ZYX had identified as its clutch sister banked sharply, her claws finding the throat of a guard who'd been trying to circle around their formation. The slaver went down hard, his weapon clattering across the rocky ground. Marcus felt a fierce pride watching the young dragons fight. They'd been caged and terrorized, but they hadn't been broken. Instead, they'd channeled their fear into focused rage, turning their natural abilities into weapons against their captors. "How many more in the cave?" Marcus asked ZYX as they reached the entrance. "Unknown," the YX replied, breathing hard from the exertion of flying with a damaged wing. "They kept us outside mostly, but I heard voices, many voices." Marcus checked his ammunition levels. Still good, but not unlimited. The improvised explosives had served their purpose, but now they'd have to rely on superior tactics and sheer bloody-mindedness to finish the job. The cave entrance led into a natural tunnel system that had been modified with prefabricated structures and lighting systems. It was clearly a temporary installation, designed to be assembled quickly and abandoned just as fast. Corporate efficiency at its finest, and most heartless. "Stay tight," Marcus instructed the dragons. "Watch for crossfire positions and secondary exits." They advanced through the tunnel system in formation, Marcus taking point while the dragons covered their flanks and rear. The natural acoustics of the caves made it difficult to determine exactly where sounds were coming from, but Marcus could hear voices ahead, human voices speaking in tense, urgent tones. The first chamber they encountered was a command center, filled with computer terminals and communication equipment. 3 technicians in corporate uniforms looked up in shock as Marcus and his dragon allies burst through the entrance. "Hands up!" Marcus barked, his rifle trained on the nearest human. 2 of the technicians immediately complied, raising their hands and stepping away from their workstations. But the 3rd made the mistake of reaching for a sidearm. ZYX's clutch brother Kex was on him before the man could clear his holster, claws raking across his arm and sending the weapon spinning away. "Smart choice," Marcus told the surrendering technicians. "Now, where's your boss?" One of them, a nervous-looking woman with stellar logistics patches on her uniform, pointed deeper into the cave system. "Conference room 3. But you don't understand. This operation has corporate backing at the highest levels. You can't just watch me," Marcus interrupted. He gestured for 2 of the dragons to guard the prisoners while the rest of his force continued deeper into the complex. The next chamber was clearly a medical facility, equipped with examination tables and drug synthesis equipment that made Marcus's stomach turn. This was where they'd been preparing the dragons for sale, treating them like livestock instead of sapient beings. "Bastards," Nira hissed, her scales shifting to an angry red coloration that Marcus hadn't seen before. They found more technicians and guards in the medical bay, along with several aliens Marcus didn't recognize. The non-humans surrendered immediately when they saw the dragons, apparently more familiar with the species' combat capabilities than their human colleagues had been. But it was the contents of the laboratory that really caught Marcus's attention. Datapads scattered across the workbenches contained shipping manifests, buyer contracts, and profit projections that detailed the scope of the slaving operation. This wasn't just about ZYX's clutch. It was part of a systematic harvesting program targeting dragon colonies throughout the sector. ZYX, Marcus called, uploading the data to his portable storage device. How many other dragon communities are there in this region? ZYX examined the manifests with growing horror. 7 major settlements, dozens of smaller ones. These documents, they have maps of all our territories. Marcus felt a cold fury building in his chest. This wasn't random piracy. It was genocide for profit. Someone at Stellar Logistics had decided that dragon extinction was an acceptable cost for corporate expansion. "We end this now," he said grimly. The deeper they penetrated into the cave complex, the heavier the resistance became. The slavers had fallen back to prepared positions, using the tunnel system's natural choke points to their advantage. But they hadn't counted on fighting opponents who could fly. "Kex, Nira, take the ceiling," Marcus ordered as they approached a heavily defended intersection. The 2 young dragons spread their wings and shot upward, using the cave's natural vertical space to bypass the guards' firing positions. Within moments, they were dropping onto the slavers from above, claws and teeth proving devastatingly effective against opponents who'd been focused on ground-level threats. Marcus pressed forward through the confusion, his rifle picking off targets as they presented themselves. The military training that had kept him alive on Proxima Centauri served him well here. Stay mobile, use cover effectively, never give the enemy time to organize a coordinated response. They found the command center at the heart of the complex, a large chamber dominated by holographic displays and communication arrays. And there, standing behind a curved desk like some corporate emperor, was the man Marcus had come to find. Commander Harrison Vex wore the insignia of Stellar Logistics Private Security Division, but his bearing and equipment screamed military special forces. He was surrounded by a half-dozen heavily armed bodyguards, their weapons trained on the cave entrance. "Mr. Chun, I presume," Vex said calmly as Marcus and the dragons took cover behind overturned furniture. "Your reputation preceded you, though I confess I'm disappointed. A washed-up Marine playing hero with a bunch of flying lizards? I expected better." "Yeah, well, I expected Stellar Logistics to have higher standards than slave trading," Marcus replied, keeping his rifle aimed at Vex Intermass. "Guess we're both disappointed." Vex chuckled, genuinely amused. "Slave trading? Mr. Chun, you misunderstand our mission entirely. These creatures are non-sapient fauna being harvested for legitimate scientific research. We have all the proper documentation." "Bullshit," Marcus snarled. "I've been talking to one of your non-sapient fauna for the past 3 days. These are intelligent beings with their own culture and technology." "Says who?" Vex asked with a shrug. "A hermit with a questionable service record and obvious mental health issues? I'm afraid your testimony wouldn't hold up in any corporate tribunal." Marcus felt the familiar rage building, the same fury that had driven him through the hellscape of Proxima Centauri. But this time, he had allies who share his anger. ZYX stepped out from behind cover, its scales shifting to brilliant crimson as it spoke in perfect, formal standard. "I am ZYX of the Crimson Valley Clutch, keeper of the historical records of my people. We have maintained a technological civilization for over 3,000 standard years. We have art, literature, philosophy, and moral codes that explicitly forbid the taking of sapient life. If you persist in claiming we are non-sapient, you reveal only your own ignorance and the moral bankruptcy of your species." The effect of ZYX's formal speech on the slavers was immediate and obvious. Several of the guards shifted uncomfortably, while one of the technicians at a nearby workstation went pale and stepped away from his post. "Impressive ventriloquism," Vex said, but his confidence was clearly shaken. "But recorded testimony from trained animals proves nothing." "Then perhaps this will," said a new voice from the cave entrance. Marcus turned to see a figure in Colonial Authority military dress walking into the chamber, flanked by a squad of armed Marines. The newcomer was a woman in her 50s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. Colonel Sarah Martinez, Terran Colonial Authority Intelligence Division, the woman announced. Mr. Vex, you and your associates are under arrest for violations of the Sapient Rights Accord, illegal weapons trafficking, and conspiracy to commit genocide. Vex's face went white as he realized the implications. You can't be serious. Stellar Logistics has congressional protection for all colonial operations. Had. Colonel Martinez corrected. Past tense. Your corporate sponsors cut you loose the moment we provided evidence of your activities to the appropriate oversight committees. Apparently, public relations matter more than profit margins, at least when the media gets involved. Marcus looked between the colonel and his dragon allies, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. How did you know to come here? Martinez smiled. We've been monitoring Mr. Vex's operation for months, waiting for enough evidence to move against Stellar Logistics directly. When you started uploading their internal documents to the Colonial Communication Network, it gave us everything we needed for warrants and arrests. Marcus's portable storage device had been automatically syncing with the Colonial Authority's intelligence network, uploading the evidence he'd gathered as soon as they'd penetrated the slavers' communication systems. His lone wolf rescue mission had accidentally become part of a much larger investigation. The dragons? Marcus asked, will be recognized as a sapient species with full rights and protections under colonial law, Martinez replied, along with reparations for the damages they've suffered and assistance in rebuilding their communities. Vex made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, reaching for a concealed weapon. But he'd forgotten about the dragons surrounding him. Nero was on him before he could clear his holster, her claws slicing through his weapon hand with surgical precision. I think not, she said pleasantly, her voice carrying just a hint of the dangerous predator that lay beneath her civilized exterior. The cleanup operation took most of the remaining day. Colonial Authority teams processed the surviving slavers, cataloged evidence, and began the complex task of shutting down the entire trafficking network. Marcus found himself giving statements to investigators, providing technical details about the assault, and generally trying to process the fact that his private war had become a very public victory. But it was the reunion between ZYX and its clutchmates that really made everything worthwhile. Watching the young dragons embrace, seeing the joy and relief on their faces as they realized they were truly safe, reminded Marcus why some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. So what happens now? ZYX asked as they stood outside the cave complex, watching Colonial Authority transports load the last of the evidence. Marcus looked around at the crater, at the dragons chattering excitedly as they planned their return to the mountains, at the soldiers working to ensure justice was done. It was almost enough to restore his faith in the system he'd once served. Now you go home, Marcus said. Rebuild what was lost, remember what was taken, and make sure this never happens again. And you? ZYX pressed. Will you come with us? The Crimson Valley Clutch owes you a debt that can never be repaid. Marcus considered the offer seriously. After 3 years of isolation on a hostile frontier world, the idea of joining a community that actually wanted him around was tempting. But he'd seen the way the dragons looked at each other, the bonds of family and shared culture that held them together. They were healing from trauma, rebuilding their society. They didn't need a broken human soldier bringing his own damage into their recovery. Thanks, Marcus said finally. But I think I'm needed here. Someone has to keep an eye on things, make sure no one else gets the bright idea to treat people like property. ZYX studied him with those large, intelligent eyes that had first convinced Marcus to open his door to a stranger. After a long moment, the young dragon nodded with understanding. You are a guardian, ZYX said simply. It is your nature, just as flying is ours. But remember, Marcus Chun, guardians need communities too. If you ever tire of watching alone, the Crimson Valley will always have a place for you. As the dragons prepared to depart, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. Colonel Martinez had approached while he was saying goodbye, her expression thoughtful. That was good work, Chun, she said. Reckless as hell, but good work. The kind of thing that makes me think maybe the colonial authority could use someone with your particular skills. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a purpose, Martinez replied. Frontier worlds are full of situations like this. Isolated communities that need protection, corporate interests that think profit justifies any means. We need people who can operate independently, who won't back down when things get difficult. Marcus looked around the crater one more time, then up at the dragons circling overhead as they prepared to fly home. ZYX gave him a little wave before joining the formation, and Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of a job well done, a community protected, and justice served. When do I start? He asked. Colonel Martinez smiled. How about right now? We've had reports of unusual activity near the Kepler 438 system. Might be slavers, might be something worse. Either way, it sounds like a job for someone who doesn't know when to quit. Marcus Chun looked at the sunset painting Kepler 442b's sky in shades of orange and gold, then back at the colonel who was offering him a chance to be more than just a forgotten exile on a frontier world. The smart thing would be to take some time, think it over, maybe negotiate better terms. But Marcus had stopped making the smart choice the moment he'd opened his door to a starving dragon, Hatchling, asking for aid. Sometimes the right thing and the smart thing were the same. Sometimes they weren't. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the right thing turned out to be exactly what you needed after all. Let's go save the galaxy, Marcus said, and meant every word. Above them, the dragons of the Crimson Valley Clutch spiraled higher into the alien sky, free and safe and heading home. And on the ground below, a battle-hardened human soldier prepared to ensure that their freedom would never again be threatened by those who mistook cruelty for strength. It was, Marcus thought as he gathered his gear, a very human thing to do. And for the first time in years, he was proud to be human.